Screw it. I'm done running.
So this happened a few months back, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm writing this because I need to share what went down the night my entire world fell apart, and how a conversation with a stranger at a random diner basically saved my life. I know this sounds dramatic, but I promise you'll understand why I'm saying that by the end. Let me start from the beginning. That morning started like any other morning for the past 10 years. I woke up at 5:30, made coffee, packed the lunch bag my mom had sewn for me back when I first got hired, and drove to the manufacturing plant where I'd been working since I was 25. I wasn't management or anything special, just a regular floor worker doing my shift, keeping my head down, collecting my paycheck. But I took pride in it. I showed up early, stayed late when they needed me, never called in sick unless I absolutely had to. I thought that mattered, you know? I thought loyalty counted for something. That morning when I walked through those doors, I immediately knew something was off. The supervisor, who usually just nodded at me, had this weird expression on his face. He called me into his office before my shift even started, and my stomach dropped because that never happens. He handed me a cardboard box and said the company was making cuts. Budget reasons, nothing personal, they appreciated my service. Just like that, a decade of my life was packed into a box that barely fit all my stuff. There was the thermos I'd used every single day, the work gloves that had my name written on them in marker, a photo Marcus had drawn of me when he was 5. I walked out of that building in a complete daze, clutching that lunch bag my mom made, feeling like someone had just erased a massive chunk of who I was. The drive home felt surreal. I kept thinking about how I was going to tell Rebecca. We'd been struggling for a while. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Money was always tight, and she'd been on me for years about finding something better, something with more potential. I'd always defended the factory job, said it was steady, reliable, that it put food on the table. But deep down, I knew she saw it as me settling, as me being too scared to reach for anything more. And now I didn't even have that to defend myself with. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for a solid 5 minutes just staring at the box. My hands were shaking. I finally forced myself to get out and walk to the front door. Rebecca was in the kitchen, and the second she saw me carrying that box in the middle of the day, her whole expression changed. She didn't even ask what happened. She just looked at me and said, "They let you go, didn't they?" Her voice wasn't sympathetic or concerned. It was resigned, like she'd been expecting this. I tried to explain. I told her it was budget cuts, that half the floor got laid off, that there was nothing I could have done differently. But she wasn't hearing any of it. She crossed her arms and said, "There's always something you could have done, Daniel. You could have looked for something better years ago. You could have gone back to school. You could have tried." Each word felt like a punch. Then she hit me with the part that really destroyed me. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're completely useless. I'm taking Marcus and Lily with me." My son Marcus was 10 years old. My daughter Lily had just turned 7. Hearing that Rebecca was taking them, that she was removing them from my life like I didn't even matter, broke something inside me that losing the job hadn't touched. I actually felt my chest tighten like I couldn't breathe properly. I wanted to argue, to fight back, to tell her she couldn't just take my kids, but the words wouldn't come out. I just stood there holding that stupid lunch bag while she went upstairs and started throwing clothes into a duffel bag. Marcus and Lily came downstairs looking confused and scared. They could feel the tension, kids always can. Marcus, who was usually so confident and talkative, just stood there quietly watching us. Lily was clutching her stuffed rabbit, this worn-out thing she'd had since she was a baby. Rebecca told them they were going to stay at Aunt Jennifer's house for a while. Marcus looked at me with these wide eyes and asked, "Dad, are you coming with us?" I couldn't even speak. My throat felt like it was closing up. I just shook my head and managed to say I'd see them soon. Lily started crying and asking why, but Rebecca was already ushering them toward the door. I watched them walk out, heard the car doors slam, heard the engine start. Then I stood in the doorway watching the taillights disappear down the street. When the sound of the engine faded completely, I was left standing in an empty house that suddenly felt massive and suffocating at the same time. I looked around at our living room. There were toys scattered on the floor, Marcus's homework on the coffee table, drawings Lily had made taped to the walls, family photos everywhere showing us when things were better, when Rebecca still looked at me with something other than disappointment. I couldn't breathe in there anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I drove without any destination, just needed to move, needed to not be in that house surrounded by reminders of everything I'd lost in one day. The sun was setting, and I found myself in a part of town I didn't usually go to. That's when I spotted this diner. It was one of those old-fashioned places, probably been there since the 70s, with a flickering neon sign that said Eddie's and windows that glowed with warm yellow light. Something about it pulled me in, maybe just because it looked like somewhere I could sit without anyone knowing who I was or what had just happened. I pushed through the door and was hit with the smell of coffee and bacon grease and something baking. There were maybe 5 or 6 other people scattered around, a couple of truckers at the counter, an elderly woman in a booth reading a newspaper. I headed straight for the back corner and slid into a booth that faced the wall, away from everyone else. A waitress appeared almost immediately. This woman probably in her 50s with tired eyes, but a kind face. She poured me coffee without asking if I wanted any, just set the cup down and said, "Let me know if you need anything else, hon." I wrapped my hands around that cup and stared into the black liquid. My reflection on the surface looked older than 35, looked knocking down and hollow. I kept replaying Rebecca's words in my head. "You're completely useless. I'm taking Marcus and Lily with me." I kept seeing Marcus's confused face when he asked if I was coming, kept seeing Lily crying as they walked out the door. My hands started shaking and I had to set the cup down before I spilled it everywhere. That's when I heard the chair across from me scrape against the floor. I looked up and there was this old man sliding into the booth, sitting down like we'd planned to meet there. He had to be in his 70s at least, maybe older. His face was weathered in that way that comes from a hard life, deep lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair was completely gray, neatly combed back. He was wearing a flannel shirt that looked clean but worn, jeans that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that got me. They had this intensity to them, like he was seeing straight through to whatever was broken inside me. "You remind me of my son," he said. His voice was steady and deliberate, each word measured. I figured he had me confused with someone else. Happens sometimes, old people mixing up faces. I told him he probably had the wrong person, that I'd never been in this diner before. But he didn't look away or apologize. He just kept studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "My boy's been gone for 35 years, he continued. "You have the same look he had in his eyes the last time I saw him. That same weight." His expression was so certain, so sad, that I didn't know what to say. I mumbled something about being sorry for his loss, that losing a child must be unbearable. He nodded slowly but didn't move from the booth. "Maybe you're not him," he said. "But you're carrying something heavy. I can see it written all over you, been carrying pain long enough to recognize it in others." He reached across the table and extended his hand. "Name's Walter Kinney." I hesitated for a second, then shook his hand. His grip was surprisingly firm for someone his age, warm and somehow grounding. "Daniel," I said quietly. "Daniel Foster." Walter nodded like my name confirmed something for him. He leaned back against the booth and just looked at me for a long moment, not in a creepy way, more like he was deciding whether to say something. Finally, he spoke again. "You've lost something today. I can tell. Something important." I let out this hollow laugh that surprised even me. "Lost everything, actually." The words just started pouring out before I could stop them. Maybe it was because he was a complete stranger and I'd never see him again. Maybe it was because I was so desperate to tell someone, anyone, what had just happened. I told him about walking into the factory that morning, about being handed that box, about 10 years of work, meaning nothing. I told him about driving home dreading the conversation I'd have to have with Rebecca. Then I told him what she said, how she called me useless, how she was taking Marcus and Lily. My voice started cracking when I got to the part about my kids. Marcus asking if I was coming with them, Lily crying as they left. Walter just sat there listening, not interrupting once, not offering those empty platitudes people usually throw out. When I finally finished, when I'd emptied out everything that had been building up inside me all day, he was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, "I know that pain. Different details, different circumstances, but the same hollow feeling inside. That feeling when you start believing maybe everyone's right about you, that you don't matter, that the world would keep spinning just fine if you disappeared completely." His words hit me because they were exactly what I'd been thinking, exactly what was running through my head on repeat. I clenched my fists on the table and said, "I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I try, it's not enough. I worked at that factory for 10 years, showed up early, stayed late when they needed me, and they let me go like I was nothing. I tried to be a good husband, and apparently I failed at that too. My voice dropped to almost a whisper. And now my kids are gone. They looked at me tonight like they didn't understand what was happening, and I had no answers for them. What kind of father does that make me? Walter's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. It makes you human, he said. Makes you someone who's been knocking down by life and hasn't figured out how to stand back up yet. But it doesn't make you worthless, no matter what your wife said. I shook my head. How can you say that? You don't even know me. You don't know all the ways I've messed up. Don't need to know all the details, Walter replied. I can see a man at a crossroads. I can see someone who's about to make a choice that'll define the rest of his life and the lives of his children. And I'm sitting here telling you this because I made the wrong choice 35 years ago, and I've lived with it every single day since. That got my attention. I looked at him properly for the first time, really looked at him, and saw the depth of regret in his face. What happened to your son? I asked. Walter exhaled slowly, like he was releasing something he'd been holding for decades. His name was Thomas. He'd be in his 50s now if he's still alive. Last time I saw him, he was 17 years old. Angry, hurt, felt like nobody understood him. Especially not me. He paused, his jaw working like he was fighting to get the words out. I was a terrible father. Worked construction 60, 70 hours a week. Told myself I was providing, giving him a better life than I had. But really, I was hiding from having to be present, having to connect, having to face my own failures as a parent. He stared at his coffee cup, turning it slowly in his hands. I was angry all the time back then, short-tempered. Thomas would try to talk to me and I'd snap at him, tell him I was too tired, that he was bothering me. His mother, my wife Ellen, she'd try to get me to pay attention, to see that our boy was struggling. But I just pushed them both away. Thought discipline meant being hard. Thought love could be implied through paying the bills. Walter's voice got quieter. Then, one night, Thomas and I had this massive fight. Can't even remember what it was about now. Probably something stupid. He said he couldn't live in that house anymore. That I made him feel like he didn't exist. I told him if he felt that way, then maybe he should leave. And he did. Packed a bag that night and walked out the door. I figured he'd cool off, come back in a few days, but he never did. Walter's eyes were glistening now, and I realized this man was sharing something he probably didn't talk about often. We filed missing person reports, he continued. Ellen and I searched everywhere. Put up flyers, called everyone Thomas knew, drove to every city within 100 miles thinking maybe we'd spot him, but it was like he'd vanished into thin air. Police said runaways usually don't want to be found, especially when they're 17 and legally close to being adults. They looked for a while, but eventually the case went cold. He took a shaky breath. Ellen died 15 years ago. Cancer. Her last words to me were about Thomas, wondering if he was okay, if he ever thought about us. I couldn't give her any answers. I've spent 35 years asking myself the same questions. Did he join the military and end up overseas? Did he change his name and start a new life somewhere? Or did something terrible happen to him? I don't know, and that not knowing is its own special kind of hell. Walter finally looked up at me again. But here's what I do know. He left because I abandoned him emotionally long before he walked out that door. I was there physically, but I wasn't present, wasn't listening, wasn't showing him that he mattered to me beyond being another mouth to feed. And now I'll never get the chance to tell him I'm sorry. Never get to explain that I was wrong, that I should have done better. The weight of his story settled over the table like a thick fog. I could barely breathe. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though part of me already knew. Walter leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. Because I see you about to make the same mistake I did. You're sitting here thinking you've lost everything, that there's no point in fighting back. You're believing what your wife said about you being worthless. And if you keep going down that path, if you let yourself disappear from your children's lives, they'll spend the rest of their existence wondering if you ever really loved them. Trust me, Daniel, that question will haunt them. He reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, his grip tight and urgent. Don't abandon them like me. Those 5 words came out clear and deliberate, each one hitting me like a physical blow. Don't abandon them like me. You still have time. You can lose a job. You can even lose a marriage. But you cannot lose yourself. Not unless you choose to hand yourself over to despair and quit. Something cracked open inside me when he said those words. All day, I'd been spiraling downward, convinced that Rebecca was right, that I was a failure, that my kids would be better off without having to watch me struggle. But hearing Walter's story, seeing the regret that had carved itself into every line of his face, I realized I was standing at the edge of the same cliff he'd jumped off decades ago. The difference was he was trying to pull me back before I fell. But what if Rebecca doesn't let me see them? I said, my voice desperate. What if she keeps pushing me out? What if every time I try, she slams the door in my face? Walter's jaw tightened and his voice took on a sharp edge I hadn't heard before. Then you fight. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with everything inside you that loves those kids. You show up. You show them you're there. You prove through your actions that they matter more than your wounded pride, more than your pain, more than whatever your wife thinks of you. He loosened his grip on my wrist but didn't let go. Because if you abandon them now, if you let this moment be the end of your presence in their lives, that choice will define everything, for you and for them. His conviction was like a living thing, filling up the booth, filling up my chest. For the first time since walking out of the factory that morning, I felt something other than crushing defeat. It was small, fragile, barely more than a spark, but it was real. I can't let them think I gave up on them, I said, more to myself than to Walter. I can't let Marcus and Lily grow up wondering if I cared. Walter nodded, and for the first time since sitting down, he smiled. It was a sad smile, weighed down by decades of loss, but genuine. That's it. That's the man your children need. Not a perfect man. Not a man who has all the answers or never makes mistakes. Just a father who shows up, who refuses to disappear, who stays present even when everything else falls apart. I stood up from that booth, my whole body buzzing with a new kind of energy. It wasn't confidence exactly, more like determination born from seeing what my life would look like if I gave up now. I reached for my wallet, but Walter waved me off. Keep your money, he said. Just keep your promise to those kids. I shook his hand one more time, and his grip was steady, warm, anchoring. Thank you, I said, and my voice cracked on the words. I don't know why you sat down with me tonight, why you shared your story, but I needed this more than I can explain. He gave me that sad smile again. Maybe I didn't choose it. Maybe we end up where we need to be, when we need to be there. Maybe telling you was as much for me as it was for you. He paused. Now go. Don't waste any more time. Don't let fear decide your next move. I nodded and walked toward the door, pushing out into the cool night air. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered under the yellow streetlights. I climbed into my car and sat there for a minute, my hands on the steering wheel, my heart pounding. Walter's words echoed in my head. Don't abandon them like me. I started the engine and pulled out onto the road. I knew exactly where Rebecca would be. Her sister Jennifer lived about 20 minutes away in a neighborhood with tidy lawns and houses that all looked similar. Whenever Rebecca needed support or wanted to prove a point, she'd run to Jennifer's place. That's where she'd taken Marcus and Lily. The drive felt both too long and too short. My mind kept racing through possible scenarios. Would she even let me through the door? Would the kids be awake? What would I say to them? By the time I pulled into Jennifer's driveway, my hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was from adrenaline, from the terrifying feeling of choosing to fight instead of retreat. The lights were on inside the house. Through the front window, I could see shadows moving around. I took a deep breath, turned off the engine, and got out of the car. Walking up to that front door felt like walking toward a cliff edge. Every step required conscious effort. I raised my hand and knocked. 3 solid raps that sounded too loud in the quiet neighborhood. For a moment, there was nothing, just muffled sounds from inside. Then footsteps. The door swung open, and there was Rebecca, her face immediately shifting to surprise, and then irritation. What are you doing here, Daniel? She didn't open the door all the way, just stood there blocking the entrance like a guard. I looked her in the eye, forcing myself to stay steady. I came for Marcus and Lily. I need to see them. I'm not leaving without talking to them. Her expression hardened. This isn't the time. They're already upset and confused enough. You showing up is just going to make it worse. You need to let this go for tonight. Something in me shifted right then. For years, our entire marriage probably, I'd backed down whenever Rebecca pushed. I'd learned that arguing just made things worse. that retreating into silence was easier than standing my ground. But not tonight. Tonight, I had Walter's voice in my head and the image of an old man who'd spent 35 years regretting the moment he let his son walk away. "No," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "I won't let it go. You can leave me if that's what you want, Rebecca. You can tell me I'm worthless every day for the rest of your life if it makes you feel better. But you are not taking my children away from me. You are not cutting me out of their lives. They need their father, and I'm not going to disappear." Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. I don't think she'd expected me to push back, especially not after the day I'd had. "Daniel, you're being dramatic. Nobody's cutting you out of anything. I just need space, and the kids need stability." Stability? I could feel anger rising now, but I forced myself to keep it controlled. What's stable about watching their father walk away without a fight? About growing up wondering if I even cared enough to show up? I took a step closer. "Do you remember when Marcus was born? When we brought him home from the hospital and you were terrified we'd mess it up? You told me I made you feel safe. You said as long as we had each other, we could handle anything." Her jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago, Daniel. Things change. People change." "You're right. Things have changed. But not what matters most." I could feel my voice starting to shake, but I pushed through. "I haven't been perfect. I know that. I probably haven't been the husband you wanted or needed. But I've always loved our kids. I've always shown up for them. And I will not let them grow up thinking their dad just gave up and walked away when things got hard." From somewhere behind Rebecca, I heard a small voice. "Dad?" Marcus appeared around the corner, his face lighting up when he saw me. Before Rebecca could stop him, he ran past her and threw his arms around my waist. The hug was desperate, like he'd been holding in fear all evening and finally felt safe enough to let it out. "I knew you'd come," he whispered against my shirt. "I told Lily you would come." And then there was Lily, her little feet padding down the hallway, still clutching that worn stuffed rabbit. When she saw me, she burst into tears and wrapped her arms around my leg. "Daddy?" Her voice was muffled, but I heard every word. "Daddy, are you staying with us now?" I dropped to my knees right there on Jennifer's front porch and wrapped my arms around both of them. Marcus was pressing his face against my shoulder, and Lily was sobbing into my shirt. I could feel them shaking, could feel all the fear and confusion they'd been holding in since watching me stand helpless as Rebecca took them away. "I'm here," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere." Rebecca was still standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, but I saw something shift in her expression. Maybe she'd expected me to stay broken, to accept her decision without protest. Instead, here I was, on my knees with our children clinging to me like I was their lifeline. For a long moment, nobody said anything, just the sound of Lily sniffling and Marcus's quiet breathing. Jennifer appeared behind Rebecca, taking in the scene. She put a hand on her sister's shoulder and said softly, "Maybe you should let him talk to the kids. They deserve that much, don't they?" Rebecca's jaw worked like she was fighting against something. Finally, reluctantly, she stepped aside. "Fine, you can come in and see them, but this doesn't mean anything's changed between us." I stood up, keeping my hands on the kids' shoulders. I looked at Rebecca and said, "You don't have to change your mind tonight. You don't have to forgive me or want me back. But I need you to understand this." I took a breath, steadying myself. "I will not stop being their father. I will not back down anymore. I will show up every single day I'm allowed to because they matter more than anything else in my life." We moved into the living room. Marcus immediately sat pressed against me on the couch, and Lily climbed onto my lap, still holding that rabbit. I could feel her little heart beating fast against my chest. Rebecca and Jennifer sat across from us, Rebecca's expression guarded, but no longer actively hostile. I knew I had to say the right things, had to make my kids understand without scaring them. "Listen," I started, looking between Marcus and Lily. "Sometimes parents have fights. Sometimes things happen that are scary and confusing. Mom and I are going through a really hard time right now." Marcus looked up at me with those wide, serious eyes, and I had to swallow hard before continuing. "I lost my job today. That's a big deal, and it means things are going to be different for a while. But you need to know something really important." Lily's small voice piped up. "What, Daddy?" "None of this is your fault, and nothing that's happening between Mom and me will ever change how much I love you. Not the job stuff, not the fighting, nothing. You two are the most important thing in my life, and I will always, always show up for you. Understand?" Marcus nodded slowly. Are you and Mom getting divorced? His voice was quiet, scared of the answer. I glanced at Rebecca. Her face was unreadable. I don't know, buddy. That's something Mom and I have to figure out, but whether we do or we don't, both of us love you. And you're going to see both of us, okay? I'm not disappearing. I promise you that. Promise? Lily asked, her voice small. I kissed the top of her head. I promise. Tomorrow and the day after and every day after that. I'll be there whenever I'm allowed to be there. We talked for maybe another hour. Small talk, mostly. Marcus telling me about his day at school before everything fell apart. Lily showing me a drawing she'd made. Normal kid stuff that felt precious because a few hours ago I thought I might never get these moments again. Rebecca stayed mostly quiet, watching us. I could tell she was processing, maybe seeing something in me she hadn't seen in years. When it got late and the kids were clearly fighting sleep, I stood to leave. Marcus immediately grabbed my arm, his fingers tight. You'll come back tomorrow, promise? I bent down to his level. I promise. Tomorrow and every day after. I'm never going to stop showing up for you. Lily threw her arms around my neck one more time. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. As I walked toward the door, Rebecca followed me out onto the porch. We stood there in the cool night air, crickets chirping somewhere in the darkness. She crossed her arms, but her posture was less defensive than before. That was good, she said quietly. What you said in there. They needed to hear that. I nodded. I meant every word. She looked at me for a long moment. What happened to you tonight, Daniel? This morning, you could barely look me in the eye. Now you're... She trailed off, searching for words. I met someone, I said. An old man at a diner who made me realize I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. He told me his story, and it scared me straight. I paused. I'm not giving up, Rebecca. On myself or on being a father. I know things are broken between us, and maybe they can't be fixed. But Marcus and Lily aren't broken, and I won't let them pay the price for our problems. Something flickered across her face that might have been respect. We'll figure out a schedule. You can see them. I'm not trying to keep them from you, Daniel. She exhaled. I just needed you to show that you cared enough to fight. I do care, more than I knew how to show before. But I'm learning. She nodded slowly, then turned and went back inside. I walked to my car, feeling lighter than I had in years. The problems hadn't disappeared. My marriage was still fractured. My job was still gone. My future was still uncertain. But for the first time, I wasn't paralyzed by those facts. I had something stronger pulling me forward now. Purpose. Direction. My children's faces when they saw me fight for them. The next morning, I woke up with that same sense of determination. I went back to see Marcus and Lily like I'd promised. Rebecca let me take them for breakfast, and we sat in a pancake house laughing over syrup-covered plates like normal people. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into finding work. I wasn't picky anymore, wasn't hung up on pride or what the job said about me. I picked up part-time gigs wherever I could, stocking shelves at a grocery store, delivering packages for a courier service, helping my dad in his shop fixing small engines for neighbors. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't what I'd imagined my life looking like at 35, but it was honest work. And more importantly, it was me proving to myself that I wasn't worthless, that I could keep standing even when everything felt unstable. My dad, seeing me finally taking initiative, handed me a bunch of his old tools one afternoon. About time you put these hands to use building something that's yours, he said. My younger brother stopped by one day while I was working in the garage and actually looked surprised. I don't know what happened to you, he said, but you finally look alive. But the real proof was in my kids. Marcus started pulling me into his homework projects, asking for my help with science fair experiments and book reports. He'd get this excitement in his voice, this genuine enthusiasm to have me involved. Lily kept drawing pictures of the three of us, always with me right in the middle holding their hands, and she'd present them to me proudly every time we were together. They were watching me, learning from what I did rather than what I said, and every day I showed up, I proved to them that their father wasn't going anywhere. About a month after that first night, I drove back to Eddie's diner. I wanted to thank Walter properly, to tell him how those 5 words had literally saved my life and my relationship with my kids. I pushed through the door and scanned every booth, looking for that weathered face and gray hair. But he wasn't there. I waited a few minutes, ordered coffee, kept watching the door thinking maybe he'd walk in. Finally, I approached the waitress, the same woman who'd served me that night. "Excuse me," I said. "There was an older man here about a month ago. Gray hair, probably in his 70s. His name was Walter Kinney. Have you seen him?" She wiped down the counter and frowned, thinking. Walter Kinney. That name sounds familiar. Then her expression shifted to something sad. "Oh, honey, Walter Kinney used to come in here regularly, years and years ago. But he passed away. Has to be at least 10, maybe 12 years now. I remember because he was such a fixture here. Always sat in that back booth and nursed coffee for hours." The cup in my hand trembled. "That's not possible. He was here. He sat with me right over there." I pointed to the corner booth. "We talked for maybe an hour." She gave me a sympathetic look, the kind you give someone who's confused or grieving. "I don't know what to tell you, but Walter's been gone a long time. I'm certain of that." I walked slowly to that booth and slid into the same seat where I'd sat that night. I ran my hand across the smooth table surface, remembering every detail of Walter's face, the firm grip of his handshake, the weight in his voice when he said those 5 words. Whether he'd been real or something else entirely, his presence had been real to me. His message had been real. His warning had pulled me back from a cliff I'd been inches from falling over. I sat there for a few minutes in silence, then whispered, "Thank you," to the empty air, hoping somehow it would reach him wherever he was. Then I left the diner and drove home, carrying his message forward like a promise. Looking back now, months later, I understand what Walter gave me. He showed me that life can strip you down to nothing. Jobs vanish without warning. Marriages crack and sometimes break beyond repair. People you trust can wound you in ways you never imagined. But none of that means you stop fighting for what truly matters. A father's worth isn't measured by his paycheck or the state of his marriage or how successful he looks from the outside. It's measured by his presence, by his refusal to walk away, by the steady love that anchors his children even when the whole world is shaking. I'm still rebuilding my life, still figuring out how to stand tall when the ground feels unsteady beneath me. Rebecca and I are working on a custody arrangement that's fair to everyone, especially the kids. Some days are harder than others, but I know now that I'm not worthless. I'm not a failure. I'm a father. And that's more than enough reason to keep moving forward, to keep showing up, to keep fighting. If you've read this far and you're going through something similar, please hear me. Don't abandon the people who need you. Don't let despair convince you that walking away is easier than standing your ground. Show up, especially when it feels impossible, especially then. Because sometimes the smallest act of staying present, of refusing to disappear, can change a life forever. It changed mine. It's changing my kids' lives. And if Walter's story is true, then maybe my showing up is changing something for him too, wherever he is. That night at the diner, a stranger saw my pain and refused to let me drown in it. He'd lived with decades of regret over his son's disappearance, and he made absolutely certain I wouldn't walk the same path. Those 5 words became my anchor. Every time I wanted to give up, every time the shame tried to pull me under, I heard Walter's voice saying, "Don't abandon them like me." Now when Marcus looks at me, I don't see confusion or disappointment anymore. I see trust. I see a kid who knows his father will show up no matter what. When Lily draws her pictures, she always puts me right there in the middle, holding their hands tight. Rebecca and I still have a long, complicated road ahead of us. I honestly don't know if we'll ever fix what's broken between us, but that's not what defines me anymore. What defines me is that I show up for my children every single day, no matter what. I think about Walter often, about whether he was really sitting across from me that night or if grief and desperation somehow conjured him up when I needed guidance most. In the end, it doesn't matter. What matters is that his message was real. The choice he gave me was real, and I chose to stand instead of disappear. If Thomas Kinney is out there somewhere, if by some chance he reads this, I hope he knows that his father never stopped searching for him, never stopped caring, never stopped regretting the way things ended, and that his father's pain helped save another man from making those same devastating mistakes. That's my story. The night I lost everything was also the night I found my footing again. Not because my circumstances magically improved. They didn't, at least not right away. But because I stopped measuring my worth by external things and started measuring it by what actually counts. Whether I'm there for my kids when they need me. The answer to that question is yes. Today, tomorrow, and every day after, always yes.